Hello there, Darkwink here with a quick getting started guide for Path of Exile 2. PoE 2 is out now, at least in early access, and given how daunting PoE and other ARPGs can be, I figured I would create a video to get you rolling into the game. This guide aims not to spoil anything, and is going to be fairly high level. More detailed guides in the future maybe. With all that said, hopefully there's something here for everybody from the new ARPG player to the seasoned veteran to learn. Jumping right in, the first thing you'll do is create a character. And the first thing to know here is the difference in the servers. There are 4 different servers: Standard, Hardcore, Solo Self-Found, and Hardcore Solo Self-Found. Standard is exactly as it sounds, just standard game. Hardcore introduces a new rule set where you only get 1 life. If you die, your character is moved to Standard servers. Solo Self-Found means that you are the only one able to find your items, there is no trade, and Hardcore Solo Self-Found is the combination of the rule sets of Hardcore and Solo Self-Found. Currently there are 6 playable classes: Sorceress, Warrior, Ranger, Witch, Mercenary, and Monk, with 2 more coming soon: Druid and Huntress. This video is not going to go in depth in any of the classes, but feel free to explore whenever you start playing the game. The first thing to do once we have our character created, our class selected, and we're into the game is how we get our skills. That can be done with skill gems. When we right click to engrave, we will get this gem cutting window that will pop up, and it will immediately recommend skills that are relevant to your character. For this example, I have chosen a ranger that wields a bow, and so the bow window is the first that pops up. You will notice that the skill gems are based heavily off of the weapon or, the spell class, like occult or elemental. Currently in the early access, there are plenty of skills that are still coming soon. Hopefully we'll see those in the coming months. But let's talk about how to get a skill. So let's just take one of these recommended ones. I quite like the look of Escape Shot. If we click, we can engrave, and now we have this skill. We can click and drag over to our skills pane, and then we can either drag and drop over to our bar, or simply click whichever bind we would like and select that skill. Now we have skills to use. The next part of skill gems to understand are 2 special cases. 1, a support gem, and 2, a spirit gem. Starting with the support gem, if we right click this to open this gem cutting menu, you will notice that there are spells that I already have learned here on the left, and then support style gems that I can select based off of these. These are gems that augment the main skill in special ways. You will notice that this is a trimmed down version because it is showing me the recommended. I can uncheck this to see all of the supports that fit with this given skill. And it's important to know that these will augment that skill in a number of different ways. It can increase its area of effect, give it more charges, reduce or increase cooldown rate, and just as examples. Whenever you have a support gem in your inventory, it's also important to know that if you hover over it, here on the left side, it will show you the supportable skills that it can support. That's useful to know so that you can plug and play and see how different supports interact with different skills. Continuing on, there's also the spirit gem. This comes into play a little later into the game, but this gives you a permanent buff. And these are based mainly around the classes, but once again, you can pick and choose different things that you want. You do not have to be a given class to choose a spirit gem. However, some of them do have requirements, such as this one needing 34 strength. and a certain weapon. The game will tell you if you need that. For example, this buff tells you it requires a martial weapon, which my example sorceress does not have. With that spirit gem, if you have it cut and on your bar, you will see that if it is active, it will have some spinny circles indicated as such, and if you right click, it is now inactive. You will also notice that the spirit bar down surrounding my mana orb in the bottom right is now full. It is at 30 of 30. If I right click once again, this persistent buff costs 30 spirit, and it is now active. I do not need to do anything. I am now buffed by that. Now that we have skills that we can use, let's check out what many people consider one of the most daunting things about Path of Exile and Path of Exile 2, the passive skill tree. You can see that there are a whole number of nodes that you can select. What's important to know to get started is that your class will start you in a different location. Once again, in this example, I am a ranger. You can see that depicted on the center image here. And rangers start in this bottom right quadrant of the skill tree. The other classes would have a different starting area. This passive skill tree is the same for all characters and all classes. For example, even though I start here as a ranger, I could come up here to take things that interact with spells. For instance, frost spells or fire spells or anything else really. Maces, swords over here and melee, shields maybe up here in this quadrant. The point is that your character can build in any of these directions. It does not matter which class they are. Now, there are a lot of different ways that you could go in this skill tree, and it is important to know that you can refund points to get the points back so that you can go a different direction. Say you made a mistake and you want to go a different way, or something got nerfed and you need to change things. It does cost gold and a relatively significant amount, and that's worth keeping in mind. However, there is a way to undo some things. So I can't pass along a way that you can just understand this quickly, but I will say one quick tip is this search up here in the top right. You can find things fairly easily. So let's say you're a ranger, and so you're shooting a lot of projectiles. A lot of your skills say projectiles whenever you hover over them. If that's the case, then we could search things that affect projectile. So I have searched projectile. You will notice that even though it's a little bit faint when we're this zoomed out, a lot of these nodes are glowing. So this gives me some level of guidance on how I can progress through the tree. You can do this with a lot of things. Let's say you really want to do a fire build or a lightning based build. Maybe you really like the curses in the game or summoning totems. A lot of these keywords you can search and get some level of idea on how to progress through here. One final note that I will say about the skill tree is these biggest nodes, called keystones, are kind of build altering or something to base a build around. So it's also worth your time to come and check some of these out, especially if you are pathing beside them as you are progressing through your skill tree. Some of them can do some really interesting things, like take your damage first from mana, for example. So those are definitely worth checking out. So now that we've gotten through the madness of the passive skill tree, let's take a bit of a deep breath and understand more about your character. If you hit C with default bindings on PC with keyboard, you will pull open your character pane that gives you a lot of information here about your character. To start, we have the three main attributes: strength, dexterity, and intelligence up in the top right. And these main attributes drive what weapons, gears, and skills we can use. Strength will deal with a lot of our melee-based weapons and skills, along with our armor-based gear. And you can see armor as a defensive stat over here. Dexterity drives a lot of our more ranged, like bows and crossbows and such. Some of those weapons and those skills. And then it also drives our evasion rating, which you can see here in the middle of the character pane. And intelligence goes with a lot of our spell casting skills, wands, staffs, and those kind of weapons, and with energy shield gear. And you can see that between our life and mana here on the character pane. All three of these main attributes also have some passive things that they give you. Strength gives you 2 life for every 1 strength point. Dexterity gives you 5 accuracy rating, which dictates how accurate you are with projectiles and strikes. And it gives 5 accuracy rating for every 1 point of dexterity. And intelligence gives you 2 mana for every 1 point of intelligence. So a quick walkthrough of these stats here in the middle of our character pane. We have life, which is exactly as you think it is, HP, life. Energy shield is your intelligence correlated defensive stat. When you have energy shield, it is a buffer to your health. So if you have, let's say you had 82 energy shield in this case, I would have effectively 164 life because I could take 82 points of damage that would first be taken from my energy shield buffer and then 82 more in my life pool. Mana is pretty common concept. That's what you will use to as a resource to cast your abilities and skills. Spirit is once again a special concept here that deals with reservations, so permanent buffs or summoning minions. Armor is our strength-based defensive skill. This deals with how you can mitigate physical damage. Evasion is our dexterity correlated defensive stat, and that deals with if you can evade projectiles and strikes from enemies. And then you also have this block percentage, which tells you it is a passive block percentage and allows you to block attacks on a percentage-based case. Then you have resistances, which is a very important part to a lot of ARPGs. Resistances allow you to mitigate attacks of certain types. So fire, cold, lightning, or chaos. It is important to build these resistances as you play the game. A lot of this can come from your items. Some of it can come from passive skill tree and so on. These are capped at 75% and generally will scale up and down with some given mechanics in the game. So that's important to keep in mind as you progress. Also of note, for a lot of new players, chaos is something that you will accumulate towards the end of the game. So if you're stuck on 0 chaos for a long time, not to worry. As a quick aside, I am streaming every once in a while over on twitch.tv/darkwink. You can come by and hang out and collect some of these in-game drops between the dates listed. And you can ask me all the questions that I didn't answer in this video. Without hopping into the game, because I do not want to spoil any of it, I would like to make a quick note about enemies. There are 4 different types of enemies. Normal, denoted with a white name at the top of your screen whenever you highlight them. Magic enemies, which are denoted with a blue name at the top of the screen. Rare enemies, denoted with a yellow name. And bosses, or unique enemies. Most of the time you will be fighting normal, but as you work up in the enemy strength scale, if you will, you will notice a couple of things. Magic enemies will generally have one modifier, and that can be a number of things. They can be quick, they can take away mana, and a bunch of other things. Rare will have a couple of modifiers. And then bosses are their own thing. Also worth noting that magic, rare, and bosses will replenish flask charges whenever you kill them, with boss adds being a special case. Even though they look like normal enemies, they will also replenish flask charges. The XP and the rarity of items dropped scales along with the rarity or strength of the enemies. So bosses are more likely to give more XP and more drops than for say a normal enemy would. While playing, you will take damage, of course, and you will run out of mana as a resource. And to deal with this, you are given from the start 2 flasks, a lesser life flask and a lesser mana flask. These can be used using the default binding on PC. On keyboard is 1 and 2. It's important to understand how these work. So if I'm running low on health, for instance, and I use my lesser life flask, I will recover 50 life over 3 seconds. So the first thing to note there is it is not instant unless you get a modifier that makes it instant, which does exist. So keep that in mind. If you're running low on life, it is better to use it a little bit earlier than it is to use too late, because it replenishes over time. The other thing is it has a number of charges that replenish, as I said, by killing magic, rare, and boss enemy types. You can also replenish this by reaching checkpoints, waypoints, and using the well in town. And you can modify these in certain ways by making the magic or finding better drops. For instance, I found this lesser life flask on this one. This one has increased charges, so it has more times that I can use this. In this case, if we compare these 2 life flasks here, this one starts with 60 charges, meaning I can use this 6 times because I consume 10 every time I use it. See by the second line there, it says consumes 10 of 60 charges on use. This one gives me an extra use, 7 uses total there. So we can reapply these, and you will see them in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And once again, you can come back to town, use the well, and they will be recharged so that you can go back and lose some more life, but then regain it with your flask. It is important with these flasks, by the way, to keep upgrading them as you're playing the game. That is not something that you want to forget. There will be plenty of drops, and also some vendors will sell these as well. Now on to one of the main goals in ARPGs, which is loot or items, and becoming powerful with those items. Items follow pretty much the same pattern that enemies do, with having white items or normal, blue, which are magic, yellow, rare, and orange, which are unique items. Generally, in that rarity is how you will find them, but also how good they are. In a case-by-case basis, obviously. Normal items will not have modifiers other than what is called an implicit modifier. Some bases will have a certain modifier that makes that item, that base item, different from others. Magic items can have up to 2 additional modifiers that can be added using different currencies. Rares can have up to 6 modifiers, once again, augmented and changed with different types of currencies in the game. And then uniques can have, I don't even know if there's a cap for uniques. I've seen quite a lot of modifiers on some special uniques. Generally, uniques are a fun find, but are situationally good. Generally, as you're going through the campaign and leveling your character, some uniques can be very good, so they're definitely worth taking a look and and picking them up. Items in PoE and PoE 2 are a very detailed subject in how you can build and craft and augment them to get exactly what you want, how you can farm things and do different activities in the game to try and build the best items. So in a getting started guide, I'm not going to go too in depth. The main thing you need to know is the rarity levels, and that the more mods that you can get on an item, the better. So mess around, experiment a little bit, and maybe a more in-depth item video in the future. Now that we have items and we are collecting them, we will need to know where to put them, given our inventory space here is limited. And also of note is that it is a Tetris style inventory system, so you may have to figure out how to slot items in as you go. But where to store them? We have the stash. So if we click on this, what you will notice is the first 4 stash tabs, unless you have bought more stash tabs. So pay attention here to 1 through 4. And one thing that I will recommend to you is starting organization early, because if you play the game a lot, this will fill up quickly. And if it's just a bunch of hodgepodge of items, sometimes it is difficult to find things, even with this search function down here at the bottom, which is very useful, by the way. So to start organization early, you can right click on a tab such as this, and it will talk about affinities here. And let's say, for instance, let's start a currency tab in tab 1. Let's put all of our gems maybe in tab 2, and in tab 3, just as an example, let's put all of our flasks. So what you will notice here is if you control click to place your items quickly into your stash, if I quickly click a gem, it took me to stash tab number 2, which I have selected as my gem tab. If I click some type of currency, in this case a scroll of wisdom, it takes me over to stash tab 1, which I have selected, and then flasks. So this is a way that you can quickly, let's say your entire inventory is filled, you can quickly just control click through and it will place things where you want them. So just something to keep in mind as you accumulate a lot of stuff. The stash is shared by all characters on a given server type. So all of your softcore characters will share a stash, as well as the gold that you have collected. You can see that in the lower left of my inventory down here. Hardcore characters will share one. Solo self-found and hardcore solo self-found will respectively share stashes. So one thing that you can do there is, let's say you're on a playthrough with a ranger. If you find some really crazy mace, for instance, or shield or something that your ranger may not use, you can still put it in the stash for a warrior that you may build at a later time, so that warrior can just go to the stash and pull it out for their use. So I do have a couple of tips and tricks that I would recommend for a couple of people. Let's start with the settings that I would recommend using. If you go over to the interface tab on the options here, I would recommend, if you scroll down, always show sockets. This allows you to always see the sockets on items without having to hover over them. Sockets are pretty important, so I would rather always see them. Show life and mana levels. I like seeing the number value above these orbs over here on the side. I would recommend that. The next is show mini life bar above you. This will pop up a little bar above your character while you're out and adventuring. This really helps so that you don't have to constantly look down in the lower left and the lower right to see what the values are. You will just see at least some level of a gauge above your head. And then similarly, a mini life bar above NPCs. I do it on NPCs or on enemies only. This is very helpful, and I would say I highly recommend this. This allows you to see the life bars above a big group of enemies without having to highlight each individual one to get their nameplate to pop up. So highly recommend this one. Another thing is this always highlight. This will show you items, which is important. So drops, when they're on the ground, they will always be highlighted. And then other things such as chests and waypoints and those kind of things. If you don't have this, sometimes the name of things like this waypoint will not be there. And so it's a little harder to find drops and stuff on the ground. Other than that, mess around with your input settings if you want. One thing that I like to do is down here at the very bottom is a create a portal. I typically put it on the B key. You can put it on whatever makes sense for you. But it allows you to quickly create a portal, which allows you to travel back and forth from a town without having to click this button down here at the bottom of the UI. This, by default, at least on PC and keyboard, is not bound at all. I recommend doing it. It's just a little quicker. The next quick tip that I would give is not getting boxed in by a lot of enemies. In PoE 2, one of the things they did was make the enemy AI a little smarter in surrounding you and corralling you into a bit of a boxed-in situation, which is very deadly in this game. There was a recent patch that made it a little less deadly, but it is still something to keep an eye out for. So if there's a lot of little ones running around, a lot of little enemies running around you and trying to get you into a wall, you might want to try rolling away from them, rolling away from the wall, because you will learn quickly that that is a quick way to die. There are two keys that I would recommend getting quite comfortable with early on, and that is the control key and the alt key. The control key, as I pointed out a little bit earlier, allows you to control click things quickly from your inventory over into, say, to sell them. You will not get a confirmation, by the way, so if you control click something, it will immediately sell it, so a little caution there. But also, when you want to disenchant, which is something you can do, control clicking is a quick way to move that over rather than having to drag and drop everything. For the alt key, that is a really useful way to understand a lot more about the game. So if I drag this over, just as an example, you will notice just to the right of my cursor there, it says Alt Inspect. If I hold Alt, you will see that I get a bigger breakdown of what this skill does, including a range percent on something that happens with quality of this gem. Along with, it allows me to explore what all of these underlined values are, which is very useful. Another thing to keep in mind as you're exploring items, skills, gems, everything. A lot of them will have these, I call them tags, here at the top, just under their name. These tags will inform you on how they interact with other skills, how they interact with passives, items, a bunch of different things. So it's important to keep these in mind. For example, this ability is a projectile ability. It is tagged as a projectile ability. So if I go into my passive skill tree, for example, and I search projectile, I will highlight things that affect projectiles. This does 10% increase projectile damage. Therefore, the damage on that skill, if I take this passive node, will affect that skill gem. So you use the Alt key a lot. It will help you understand modifiers. It will help you understand how skills and passives interact. It's just an easy way to inspect and explore the game to a deeper level. Another thing that I would recommend is movement speed early on. Movement speed is very good in this game for running away from enemies, kiting enemies. It makes your dodge roll faster, those kind of things. You can look for this on boots early on as a modifier. I would recommend that. No need to go and farm. It's not required rather, but I would highly recommend some movement speed. Find that on some boots. You will be a very lucky person if you find it, and it will make your game a lot easier earlier on. Another thing to check is the top left corner of the UI. Though I don't have any examples here, and I don't want to show deeper into the game for fear of spoiling and stuff like that, you will want to check fairly often in the top left as you're playing to see buffs and debuffs. Sometimes it is a little difficult in the heat of the battle to scroll over and highlight them, but if you do scroll over them, it will tell you exactly what's going on. I highly recommend keeping an eye up there. For debuffs, you can quickly learn if your character is slow or bleeding or something like that. You will see a generally red outlined indicator in the top left that will let you know that something is debuffing you. And then one final tip for you before you get started is how to quickly travel. You will use portals a lot. That can be done anywhere. It will take you back to the town. You can then click the portal again to resume right back from where you put the portal. And also waypoints. So waypoints will be scattered out throughout. Generally every map will have one, and then towns will have one. If you click one to open this map for teleporting, it will look something like this. And then to understand the map a little bit, this golden nail-looking thing is where your quests are telling you to go. If you have a gray circle such as this one here, this means that you've been to the map but have not discovered the waypoint. A blue circle like this means that you have the waypoint in that map. And then a gray circle with a question mark in it like this means that you have not even been in the map and you have not found the waypoint. Now, a quick little trick that I like to do a lot is resetting instances of maps so that you can either farm gear or re-clear a map for XP so that you can level if you feel that you may need to level a couple more times. Maybe there's a passive skill tree node that you want to get before you start a boss, or you just feel not powerful enough. You can go and reset these instances. To do so, you can control click on them, and it will pop up with this interface. The new one will create you a new instance. Doing so will reset any ones that are open. If I were to have one open, it would have another entry here, and it would say enter, which would allow me to rejoin that instance. There's a bit of information, but for the most part, just knowing how to reset it is pretty useful and allows you to go and farm and level and all that stuff. With that being said, you will notice the monster level denoted on the map. You want to keep that pretty close to your level in order to get any real amount of XP. Generally, you will want to be only a level, maybe 2, above this monster level before it really has a lot of diminishing returns. So keep that close to your level. For example, I'm 3 on this character, so going back and refarming this would be fine. I would get plenty of XP, and I could go and get the loot, but you want to keep that close. So, and over leveling is pretty good, especially on something like hardcore where you don't want to die. And I think that's all you really need to know to get started in PoE 2. This was a pretty general high-level look at the game. There's a lot more to learn, but I would encourage you to do so while playing. The game does a pretty good job of showing you and explaining as you go, so you shouldn't be that worried hopping into it. With that being said, thanks for watching. Subscribe and like the video, and comment down below what class you are going to start in PoE 2. I'd like to hear it. Thanks.